The first sign that everything was about to unravel wasn't a police siren or a knock at the door. It was the frantic, breathless sound of my son, David, on the other end of the phone. "Mom," he gasped, his voice thin with panic. "It's all coming apart. They know. The feds. They're on to us." I was standing in my kitchen, a place of quiet, comforting routine. But his words turned the familiar warmth into a sudden, chilling frost. My hands, which had been kneading dough for a simple loaf of bread, froze. The flour on my knuckles looked like a dusting of fine snow on a gravestone. For 10 months, I had been an accomplice. Not to a violent crime or a theft, but to a lie. A carefully constructed fiction that was supposed to save my son. But now, it was threatening to destroy us both. My name is Susan. I'm 55 years old, and until that moment, I thought my life was a quiet, comfortable portrait of middle-aged contentment. A home in the suburbs, a good circle of friends, a perfect son, and a lovely daughter-in-law. But that perfect portrait was a forgery. 6 months ago, my son David, a successful architect with a beautiful family, had come to me, his face a mask of desperation. His business, he confessed, was hemorrhaging money. He was drowning in debt. And in a moment of panicked and flawed reasoning, he and his wife, Rachel, had devised a plan. They would file for bankruptcy, hide their assets, and start over. And they needed my help. I didn't hesitate. A mother's love is a dangerous, illogical thing. The parent in me, the one that had held David when he scraped his knee and comforted him through his first heartbreak, took over. The adult, the one that knew the law and the consequences, was pushed aside. I liquidated my retirement fund. I sold my husband's classic car. I transferred the money to a ghost account they had set up in a foreign country. All of it. The fruit of 35 years of careful saving, gone in a single gut-wrenching click. They told me it was the only way. I told myself it was for them. But in my heart, I knew it was a reckless act, a desperate gamble. I was a hero antagonist in my own story. The hero, trying to save my son. The antagonist, helping him commit a crime that would ultimately haunt us. "David," I whispered into the phone, my voice cracking. "How do they know?" "A client, a big one. They found some discrepancy in the records, a transaction that didn't add up. They've opened an investigation. They're looking at all our accounts, Mom, the hidden ones. They're going to find the money." His words were a knife twisting in my gut. We had been so careful, so meticulous. We had created a web of lies so intricate, I was sure it was foolproof. But they had found the first thread, and now the whole thing was unraveling. The shame I felt was a cold, bitter taste in my mouth. It wasn't just my own shame, but the shame of a mother who had led her own child down a path of self-destruction. I thought of Rachel, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and her cool and calculating eyes. I had always suspected she was the mastermind of this whole scheme. She had a way of turning every conversation into a transaction, every emotion into a negotiation. I had trusted her, had believed that her love for my son was pure. But now, as I looked at the flour on my hands, I realized that I had been a fool. I had been so blind, so wrapped up in the need to protect my child, that I had become a part of a betrayal I couldn't even comprehend. "We have to talk," David said, his voice pleading. "We need to get rid of the money. We need to hide everything. I'm coming over now." I hung up the phone. The silence that followed even more terrifying than his words. The room, which had always been my sanctuary, now felt like a prison. My kitchen, a place of love and warmth, was a crime scene. I had broken the law. I had become a criminal. and all for a son who I now realized was not the man I thought he was. He was a stranger who had taken my love and used it as a shield. My world had not just cracked, it had shattered into a million pieces, and I didn't know how to put it back together. What was going to happen now? Would they come for me? Would I lose my home? My freedom? I had no idea. All I knew was that my son was coming, and with him, he was bringing a truth that would change everything, a truth I was too scared to face. I stood in my kitchen, the phone still in my hand, the air thick with the residue of David's panic. The bread dough, once a symbol of life and comfort, now felt like a cold, lifeless weight in my hands. I felt a strange sense of disassociation, as if I was watching the scene from a distance, an actress in a play I hadn't auditioned for. My mind, usually so precise and organized, was a jumble of competing thoughts. The parent screamed in panic, but the adult quietly began to assess the damage. We had made a terrible mistake, and now we had to face the consequences. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent sound that made me jump. It was him. I opened the door to find David and Rachel standing there, their faces a pale, terrified reflection of my own. David's expensive suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled. Rachel, usually so composed, had dark circles under her eyes, her perfect makeup smudged. They looked not like the successful couple they pretended to be, but like two criminals on the run. "Mom," David said, his voice low and urgent, "we have to talk. Now. They're going to freeze our assets. They're going to find it all." I led them into the living room, a place of quiet elegance that felt so out of place in this moment of raw, ugly truth. They sat on my perfect white sofa, their bodies tense and rigid. They were no longer my guests. They were my co-conspirators. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and shared guilt. "We need to come up with a plan," Rachel said, her voice sharp and brittle. "We need to move the money. We need to hide it in another account. We can't let them find it." I looked at her, at the woman I had once thought of as my daughter, and I felt a new kind of coldness. She was not panicking for David or for me. She was panicking for the money that I had given them, the money that I had worked my entire life for. It was a transactional analysis moment for me. She was not a part of my family. She was a business partner, and a dishonest one at that. "Rachel," I said, my voice steady, "do you understand what we're talking about? We're talking about prison. We're talking about our lives being destroyed. We're not talking about a business transaction." She scoffed, a small dismissive sound. "Please, Susan, don't be so dramatic. We just need to move the money. It's a simple wire transfer. No one will ever know." Her confidence was a cold, unsettling thing. It was a lie. She was so sure of her ability to manipulate, to deceive, that she had convinced herself that she was above the law. I felt a flash of anger, a hot, searing flame that burned away my fear. I had helped them. I had given them everything, and they had repaid me with this? A cold, heartless scheme that was now threatening to send me to jail? I looked at my son, at his face, a mask of shame and fear, and I realized that he was just a pawn in her game. She was the one who had orchestrated this. She was the one who was truly dangerous. "You're not going to touch that money," I said, my voice low and firm. "Not until I know what's really going on." My words hung in the air, a silent challenge. They both looked at me, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had expected me to be a helpless accomplice. They had never expected me to take a stand. The truth was, I had a secret that they had no idea about. I had, in a moment of clarity, made a copy of all the files, every wire transfer, every ghost account, every transaction. It was an act of self-preservation, a desperate attempt to protect myself from the consequences of their lies. I was not just a co-conspirator. I was a witness.
I was a detective in my own home, a keeper of a truth they thought was safe. They were so confident in their lies, so sure of their victory, that they hadn't seen the one thing that could destroy them, the one thing that was hidden in plain sight. I had a choice to make. I could either help them hide the money and become a true criminal, or I could use my evidence to expose them and save myself. But saving myself meant turning my back on my own son. It was a moral dilemma, a choice between my life and his. I didn't know which path I would choose. All I knew was that their elaborate scheme was not the only thing that was unraveling. My love for my family was unraveling too.
The silence that followed my declaration was heavier than any words. It was a silence filled with disbelief and contempt. David stared at me, his mouth slightly ajar as if he were seeing a ghost. Rachel, however, was not so shocked. Her face, which had been a mask of panic, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She had expected me to be a weeping, helpless accomplice. She had never expected me to stand up to her. I had always been the quiet mother, the supportive matriarch. The parent in me had always tried to keep the peace. But now, the adult was taking charge, and the child was a distant memory. "Don't be ridiculous, Susan," Rachel said, her voice dripping with condescension. "What are you talking about? What files? We told you everything was taken care of. You don't know what you're talking about." Her words were a lie, and we both knew it. She was trying to regain control, to belittle me, to make me feel small and powerless. I didn't flinch. I walked to my desk, my movements deliberate and slow. My hands were steady as I took a simple manila folder from a drawer and placed it on the coffee table. The file was thin, almost unassuming, but inside were copies of every single file, every wire transfer, every ghost account, every bit of digital breadcrumb they had left behind. "I know exactly what I'm talking about, Rachel," I said, my voice low and calm. "I have copies of everything, every single transaction. I'm not a helpless old woman, and I'm not a fool. I did what any mother would do, but I also took precautions. I needed to protect myself." The color drained from Rachel's face. She looked from me to the folder and back again, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. She had so meticulously planned everything, had been so sure of her flawless execution, that she had never considered the one variable she couldn't control, a mother's instinct to protect herself. She had underestimated me. She had thought she was dealing with a simple accomplice, not with a woman who had a lifetime of quiet observation. David just stood there, speechless. He was a pawn in her game, a puppet on her strings. And he had just found out that I was the one holding the scissors. Rachel's composure shattered. The meticulously crafted facade of the perfect daughter-in-law crumbled, revealing the desperate, terrified woman beneath. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she sank onto the sofa, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Her sobs were not for the money or for David, but for herself, for the elaborate scheme that had just been exposed. "It wasn't for us," she choked out, the words a raw, unfiltered confession that hit me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about, Rachel? Of course it was for us. The business, the house, the loans." Rachel shook her head, her face a mess of tears and mascara. "No, it wasn't for the business. The money was for my mother. She's sick. David, she has a rare degenerative disease. The treatments, they're so expensive. We were paying for them. We were giving her everything. But it wasn't enough. We were going under. We had to do something." I stared at her, my mind reeling. The domino effect I had suspected was real, but it wasn't a domino of greed. It was a domino of love,
a love so desperate and misguided that it had led them to a life of crime. This was the first plot twist, the subversion of my initial impression. Rachel wasn't a greedy, heartless woman. She was a woman driven by a fierce, desperate love for her mother. I felt a confusing mix of emotions, a deep anger at the lies, a profound sadness for her predicament, and a reluctant empathy. She was a hero antagonist, a woman acting with the best of intentions, but in the most destructive of ways. My own shame and fear were now tinged with a new layer of complexity. I had been part of a crime, but a crime committed not for greed, but for love. The moral dilemma had just deepened. I was not just choosing between protecting myself and my son. I was choosing between protecting myself and my daughter-in-law's sick mother. And I had a feeling that the truth, the whole truth, was still hidden. I needed to see the documentation, the medical records. I needed to know if she was telling the truth. All I knew was that the narrative I had so carefully constructed in my mind had just been completely rewritten.
The weight of Rachel's confession settled over the room like a thick blanket. David, pale and shaken, stared at his wife as if he were seeing a stranger. I looked at the two of them, the perfect, successful couple I had so loved and admired, and I saw a new truth. Their lives weren't built on a foundation of perfection. They were built on a foundation of desperate secrets. The veneer of success was just that, a thin, brittle shell over a core of panic and pain. My mind, now fully in adult mode, began to process the information, to sort through the lies and find the truth. The emotional child in me, however, was still reeling from the shock. "Rachel," I said, my voice softer now, "is this true? All of it?" She nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "Yes, Susan, it's all true. We had to file for bankruptcy. We had no other choice. My mom, she doesn't know. We can't tell her. It would break her heart." I felt a profound sadness. My daughter-in-law had been carrying this burden alone, a silent shadow character in the drama of their lives. She had chosen to lie to protect her family, just as I had chosen to lie to protect mine. The parallel between us was chilling. I saw myself in her, a woman driven by a desperate, misguided love. The mirror effect was a powerful, disorienting thing. "I need to see the proof, Rachel," I said, my voice firm. "I need to see the medical records. I need to see the bills. Everything." She looked at me, a flicker of suspicion returning to her eyes. "Why? So you can turn us in?" "No," I said, looking from her to David, "so I can know what I'm fighting for. So I can know what I'm risking my freedom for. If you're telling the truth, then we can work this out. But if you're not, then I can't help you." My words were a gamble, a test of her honesty. I had to know if the pain in her eyes was real, or just another act than I had thought. She hesitated, then nodded. "They're at my mom's house, in a box. I can go get them." "No," I said, my voice gaining authority. "I'll go with you. I need to see for myself." The drive to her mother's house was a silent, tense affair. The car, a borrowed sedan that they were using to save on gas, felt like a cage. The streets, the familiar trees and houses of our town looked alien. I was on the way to a stranger's house, to see a stranger's illness, to confirm a stranger's story. I had so many questions. Who was this mother? Was she really sick? Was Rachel a victim, or just a more convincing liar than I had thought? As we pulled up to the house, a small, meticulously manicured cottage with a wreath on the door, I felt a sense of trepidation. This was not the home of a criminal. This was the home of a loving daughter. This was a home that held a secret I had to see for myself. We walked inside, and the smell of jasmine and lemon polish hit me like a physical memory.
The house was clean, warm, and filled with a sense of quiet grace. A frail-looking woman, thin and pale, was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, a book in her hands. She looked up at us and smiled, a beautiful, fragile smile that reminded me of my own mother. This was Rachel's mother, the shadow character, the one who had been at the heart of this entire lie, the one who was at the heart of my son's downfall. "Rachel, honey, you're here," she said, her voice a soft, gentle whisper. Rachel knelt by her mother's side, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I'm here, Mom. I'm here." I stood in the doorway, a silent witness to a truth that was both beautiful and terrifying. The betrayal was not about greed. It was about love. And I was about to find out just how far that love would go. The answers were in a box in the closet. But what I was about to discover was a new kind of truth, one that would force me to question not only my family, but my own sense of right and wrong. I had a feeling that the most complicated betrayal had not yet been revealed. The documents were about to tell me something far more damning, something about my own son.
The little cottage was a place of quiet, dignified suffering. The air, heavy with the scent of jasmine and old paper, felt thick with unspoken history. As I watched Rachel kneel beside her mother's wheelchair, her face a mask of love and despair, I felt a new kind of shame. I had been so quick to judge her, to label her as a greedy manipulator. But now, in this quiet, unassuming home, I was a witness to a truth that was both heartbreaking and terrifying. The narrative therapy was in full effect. My entire story about Rachel, the villain, was being rewritten in real time, replaced with the story of a woman driven by a fierce, desperate love. Rachel, her shoulders still shaking with sobs, finally stood up. She walked to a small antique chest of drawers in the corner of the room, her movements stiff and reluctant. She pulled a dusty box from the bottom drawer and placed it on the dining table. Inside, a jumble of papers, documents, and envelopes lay scattered. "This is it, Susan," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Everything. The bills, the doctor's notes, the receipts for the treatments. We were running out of money. We had to do something." I sat down and began to sift through the papers. The documents were a testament to a long, brutal battle. I saw doctor's notes from specialists detailing a rare and aggressive form of multiple sclerosis. I saw stacks of hospital bills, each one more shocking than the last. I saw payment plans, rejection letters from insurance companies, and desperate pleas to charitable foundations. The numbers were astronomical, a bottomless pit of debt that would have bankrupted anyone. Rachel hadn't been lying. Her mother was sick, and the money they had taken from me, the money from the fake bankruptcy scheme, had been going to pay for these bills. My initial anger began to melt away, replaced by a profound and overwhelming sense of empathy. I had been so wrong. I had been so quick to judge. The mirror effect was powerful. In my own need to protect my child, I had been willing to lie and steal, just as Rachel had. The parent in me, the one who had always believed in forgiveness, was in a painful but powerful conversation with the adult who was processing this new reality. I reached for a thick manila envelope at the bottom of the box. It was a file from the clinic, and it contained a ledger, a simple, unassuming notebook filled with neat, precise handwriting. It was a record of every transaction, every dollar that had been spent. I recognized Rachel's handwriting on the first page. It was a meticulous, detailed log, a chilling testament to the lengths she had gone to. I flipped through the pages and the story of their desperation unfolded before me. They had been paying for her mother's care for years, bleeding themselves dry, and the fake bankruptcy scheme had been a last-ditch attempt to stay afloat. I felt a surge of emotion, a wave of relief that Rachel was not a monster. But as I flipped through the final pages of the ledger,
My eyes landed on a number that made my heart stop. It was a large, round number, an odd number, a number that was a massive, inexplicable deposit. It was dated just 2 months ago, and it was a sum that was so large it could have solved all their problems. But it wasn't a bank transfer. It was a wire transfer from a third party. And the account number was one I didn't recognize. The account number was not for Rachel's mother's clinic. It was not for her hospital. It was for a private offshore account. The discovered documentation was revealing something far more sinister. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This wasn't about a mother's love. This was about a secret. This wasn't about an act of desperation. This was about an act of pure, unadulterated greed. Rachel had been telling me the truth, but it was a half-truth. She had told me what she wanted me to believe, the story of a loving daughter who was willing to risk everything for her mother. But this number told a different story. It was a story of a betrayal that had nothing to do with her mother's illness. "Rachel?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What is this?" She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear, a fear that was not for her mother, but for herself. She had told me one lie, and I had believed her. But there was another lie, a bigger lie, that was about to unravel everything. The moral dilemma had just deepened. This wasn't about saving a sick woman. It was about exposing a lie I had been a part of. And I had a terrible feeling that the person who was truly responsible was someone I loved more than anyone else in the world.
The silence was a thick, suffocating thing. Rachel's face, which had been a map of grief and desperation, was now a mask of pure terror. She stared at the page I was pointing to, at the wire transfer number, and I knew. She hadn't been lying about her mother's illness. She hadn't been lying about the bills. But she had been lying about the money. She had been lying about the why. My gut, the one that had been screaming at me to listen to the adult all along, was now on fire. The mirror effect was gone. I was not looking at myself anymore. I was looking at a complete stranger, a woman who had used her mother's illness as a cover for a much larger, more elaborate betrayal. "What is this, Rachel?" I repeated, my voice now a low, dangerous whisper. "This isn't for your mother's clinic. This is for a private account." She didn't speak. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with a terror that was far more damning than any confession. She had used her mother's illness as a red herring, a way to manipulate my empathy. She had told me a half-truth, a lie of a mission that was more powerful than any fabrication. I stood up, my knees trembling with a mix of rage and a profound, heartbreaking sadness. I had been played. I had helped them commit a crime, not for love, but for a lie. I walked to my car, the folder of documents now feeling like a heavy, leaden weight in my hands. I drove home, my mind a storm of accusations and fear. I had been betrayed, not by my son, but by his wife. I had been a pawn in her game, a willing accomplice in a crime that was now threatening to send me to prison. But as I pulled into my driveway, a new and more chilling thought took root in my mind. The money. The money had been transferred to an account in David's name, a separate account, a secret account, an account I had never seen before. The hero antagonist was not Rachel, it was David. He was waiting for me at the door, his face a mask of false concern. "Mom, where have you been? Are you okay? We have to figure this out. We have to move the money before they find it." I looked at him, at my son, the boy I had loved, the man I had helped, and I saw a stranger. I saw a man who had lied to me, who had used his mother's love as a tool for his own personal gain. The betrayal by children theme was no longer a theoretical concept. It was a cold, hard reality. I know where the money went, David. I have the documents, the wire transfer numbers. I know where the money went. His face went pale.
He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes, the look of a man who had been caught, was all the confirmation I needed. He had been a part of this. He had known all along. He had used his wife's love for her mother to manipulate me to get my money to build a new life for himself. The discovered documentation had not just exposed a lie, it had exposed my son. I felt a profound sadness, a heartbreak that was deeper than any I had ever known. I had been willing to go to jail for him, to risk my freedom for him, and he had lied to me. He had used my love as a weapon, my son, my own flesh and blood. The moral dilemma had just changed completely. I was not just choosing between protecting myself and my family. I was choosing between protecting myself and the man who had betrayed me, my son, the man who had used my love as a weapon, and I had a terrible feeling that the full truth, the whole unvarnished truth, was still hidden, waiting to destroy us all. The pain would never go away, but a choice was to be made, and it would not be a choice for forgiveness. Not yet.
The drive home was a blur. The familiar streets, the neat lawns, the children playing in the parks, all of it seemed alien. My world, the one I had so carefully constructed with love and trust, was a shattered mirror. I had looked into the eyes of my own son and seen a stranger, a liar, a man who had used his mother's love as a tool. The documents on the passenger seat, a heavy, cold weight, were a testament to a truth so terrible it felt impossible. David hadn't been an unwitting accomplice to his wife's lie. He had been the architect of his own. Rachel's story, a half-truth of desperation and love, had been a smokescreen. He was not a victim. He was the perpetrator. The parent in me, the one who had always defended him, who had always believed in his goodness, was now in a bitter, silent conflict with the adult who knew the truth. I pulled into my driveway, and my home, which had always been a sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum. Every object, every piece of furniture felt tainted by his lies. The quiet elegance of my living room, the one that I had loved so much, was a monument to my own blind love. I walked inside and locked the door, a physical act of defiance against a world that had betrayed me. I sat at my desk and spread the documents out, a cold, clinical examination of my own heartbreak. The wire transfers, the offshore account, the meticulous records of money siphoned from my retirement fund. All of it in his name. All of it a lie. The forgiveness that doesn't remove the pain was a cruel reality. The pain was so deep it felt like a physical wound. The love I had for him was still there, a burning, aching thing, but it was now tangled with a rage and a disappointment so profound I didn't know how to move. I replayed the conversation with Rachel in my mind. Her confession, her tears, her desperation. It had all been an act, a beautifully, tragically convincing performance to manipulate my empathy. She had been a pawn in his game, a woman who had, in her own misguided way, been trying to help her mother, only to be used by her husband for his own selfish gain. My son, the man I had loved and protected my entire life, the man I had gone to jail for. He had used me, and in my blind love, I had let him. I had been an accomplice in my own destruction. The narrative therapy was now in reverse. The story I had believed my whole life, that my son was a good man, was a lie, and the truth was a cold, hard, unassailable thing. I looked at a framed photo of David on my desk, a picture from his high school graduation. He was smiling, his eyes filled with a future that had yet to be written. I had believed in that smile. I had believed in that boy. But that boy was gone. In his place was a stranger, a man who had used my love as a weapon. The mirror effect was a terrifying reality. In my desperate need to protect him, I had become an accomplice to his crimes. I had become part of the very thing I despised.
I had, in a way, betrayed myself. The hero-antagonist was not just David, it was me. I had been a hero to him, but an antagonist to myself. I had to face the reality. I was not just a victim, I was a co-conspirator. The silence of the house was a canvas for my racing thoughts. The domino effect was now complete. My love for my son had led to my complicity. My complicity had led to his crime had led to his betrayal, and his betrayal had led to this. My home, my life, my freedom, all of it was at risk. I had to act, not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of a cold, clear, unwavering sense of justice. I had to do what was right, not just for myself, but for my son. I had to force him to face the consequences of his actions. I had to show him that love was not a shield, but a mirror. It was a mirror that reflected not just the good, but the ugly and the terrible. I had a choice to make. I could protect him and risk everything, or I could expose him and save myself. The choice was not a choice at all. It was a moral imperative. He had to be held accountable, and I was the only person who could do it. I was the only person who had the documents, the knowledge, the power. I had to become the adult he had never been. My hands, which had been trembling with fear, were now steady with resolve. I stood up, walked to my phone, and with a cold, clear mind, dialed the number of a lawyer I had found in the phone book. I had to make a call that would change everything. The time for running was over. The time for the truth had come.
The lawyer's voice on the other end of the line was crisp and professional, a calm island in the sea of my emotional turmoil. Her name was Ms. Davies, and she specialized in financial crimes. I had found her in an old phone book, a relic of a time before the internet, a simple tool for a complicated problem. I didn't tell her everything. I couldn't. Not yet. I just told her I had some concerns about a business transaction and some financial irregularities. I was a client seeking advice, not a woman confessing to a crime. My words were a carefully constructed web of half-truths, a mirror of my son's own lies. The authority of her voice, her calm, measured tone, was a cold shock of reality. "The penalties for what you're describing are severe, ma'am," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. They can lead to significant prison time. The government does not take these matters lightly." Her words were a physical blow, a confirmation of my worst fears. I felt a cold knot of dread in my stomach. I was facing prison, all for a son who had betrayed me. The second chance twist was a brutal reality. I had a chance to save myself, but at a cost I didn't know if I could pay. "What if the money was returned?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What if the debts were paid?" "That would be a mitigating factor, ma'am, but it would not absolve you of your crime. The act itself is a crime. The government is not forgiving." Her words were a confirmation of my fears. There was no easy way out. There was no clean slate. I had to choose. My life, my freedom, or his. I sat in silence for a long time, the weight of her words a physical presence in the room. I had to make a choice that would define not only my future, but the future of my son, a future he had so carelessly gambled away. I had to do what was right. I had to expose him. But how? How could I do it without incriminating myself? How could I reveal his lies without a confession of my own? The moral dilemma was now a labyrinth with no clear exit. I looked at the documents on my desk, the wire transfers, the bank accounts, the meticulous records of money siphoned from my retirement fund. The evidence was irrefutable. I could take this to the authorities. I could expose him. I could save myself. But what then?
He would go to prison. His life would be over. And I would be free. But at what cost? What was the price of my freedom? Was it the life of my own child? I thought of the viral video, the one where I had been a helpless old woman, the one where my own family had betrayed me. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. They had exposed me for a lie, and now I was about to expose them for a crime. I had to use the same weapon they had used on me, the weapon of truth. But my truth was not a simple confession. It was a complicated, intricate web of lies, a web that I had helped to weave. I took a deep breath. I had a plan that was not about revenge, but about justice, a plan that was not about punishment, but about a final, desperate act of love. I had to force him to face the truth, to face the consequences of his actions. I had to show him that love was not a shield, but a mirror. I had to show him the man he had become, and I had to do it in a way that would leave a lasting legacy, a legacy of honesty, of redemption, of a love that was not blind, but clear-eyed and unwavering. I had to use my cunning to reveal her lie and save my family from a betrayal they couldn't see, even if it meant risking everything. The final confrontation was coming, the final reckoning, and I was ready.
The phone call was short and to the point. My voice, devoid of emotion, was a cold shock to them. "I know," I said. "I have the documents. We need to talk. We'll meet at the park, the one by the lake, in an hour." I didn't give them a choice. I didn't offer a compromise. I was not a mother asking for a favor. I was an authority issuing a command. They could hear the finality in my voice, the unflinching resolve that had replaced my fear. They had a choice to make, and they both knew it. They had to come. I arrived at the park first, a full 15 minutes early. The park, a place of children's laughter and family picnics, was a stark and jarring contrast to the grim reality of our situation. I sat on a park bench, the documents in a briefcase on my lap, a heavy, cold weight. This was my new life. This was the life I had chosen, a life of secrets and lies. The adult in me was making a cold, calculated decision, a decision that would either save us or destroy us. The parent was a silent, aching presence in my heart. They arrived together, their faces pale and drawn. David's eyes were bloodshot, and his suit was rumpled. Rachel's hair was a mess, and her face was a mask of fear. They looked like two people who had been on the run for days. They saw the briefcase on my lap, and their eyes darted from it to my face. They had so many questions, so many accusations, but they didn't speak. They just stood there, their bodies rigid with tension. "Sit," I said, my voice calm and low. They hesitated, but then, seeing the unwavering resolve in my eyes, they sat on the bench opposite me. The distance between us was a chasm of lies and betrayal. "Mom," David began, his voice a pleading whisper, "we can explain. We can fix this. You don't have to do this. We can move the money. We can hide it again. We can fix this." "Fix it?" I asked, my voice flat. "You can't fix this, David. You gambled with my life. You used my love as a shield. You lied to me. Both of you did. You hid the truth from me. And now you want me to help you hide it again? You think I'm a fool?" Rachel's voice, a cold, brittle thing, cut through the air. "Don't be dramatic, Susan. We had a plan. A good plan. You were a part of it. You were willing to do it. We were just asking for your help." "Asking?" I scoffed. "You didn't ask me, Rachel. You manipulated me. You used your mother's illness to get to me. You used my love for my son to make me a co-conspirator. You betrayed me." Rachel's face went white. She had been so sure of her ability to manipulate me,
to lie to me, to turn me against my own son. But she had underestimated me. She had underestimated a mother's instinct. The mirror effect was powerful. She had used her mother's illness to manipulate me. Just as my own son had used my love for him, I had become a willing participant in my own destruction. I had to show them that I was not a victim. I was a force that was about to change their lives forever. The federal investigation is not the only thing we have to worry about, I said, my voice low and dangerous. There is something else, something you don't know about, something that will change everything. They looked at me, their eyes wide with a new kind of fear. The fear of the unknown, the fear of a secret they didn't know I had. They had been so sure that they knew everything, that they had all the cards, but they had just realized that the game had changed, the rules had changed, and I was the one who was holding the winning hand. "What are you talking about, Mom?" David asked, his voice shaking. "I'm talking about a choice, David," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "A choice that will define not only your future, but your character. A choice between lies and truth. A choice between your past and your future." I had a plan that was not about revenge, but about justice. A plan that was not about punishment, but a final desperate act of love. The domino effect had just been reversed. I was about to use their own lies, their own secrets, their own greed to save them from themselves. I was about to give them a second chance, but it would come with a price that would be far more painful than a jail cell. The final confrontation was about to begin, the final act of our tragic play, the final reckoning, and I was ready to pull the curtain.
The silence on the bench was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant laughter of children. David and Rachel stared at me, their faces a mix of fear and confusion. They were waiting for me to reveal my secret, to pull out a document that would expose a final, damning lie. And I was about to give it to them, but not in the way they expected. The third twist was not about money, but about a moral lesson that would be far more painful than any punishment. "You're right," I said, my voice soft. "I have something you don't know about, something that will change everything." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a single, thin folder. It was not the documents from the federal investigation. It was not a hidden will. It was not a secret bank account. It was a folder of my own. I had already taken action. I was not just a co-conspirator, I said, my voice low and firm. I was a detective. I made copies of all the documents, and when I found the offshore account, I knew. I knew you were lying to me, David. I knew you had used me. I knew you had used your wife's love for her mother to get to me. I knew. But I didn't go to the police. I went to a lawyer. They looked at me, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had expected me to be a victim. They had never expected me to be an agent of my own destiny. I didn't want to see my son go to jail. I didn't want to see the father of my grandchild lose everything. But I knew I couldn't help you unless you faced the truth. I pulled a document from the folder, a long, official-looking document. It was a contract with a foundation. I used a portion of my retirement fund, the one I had given you, to pay off your debts, but not in a way that would absolve you. I used it to create a trust, a foundation. It will pay off your debts, but on one condition. You will spend the next 5 years working for it. Working for free. You will use your skills, your business acumen to help people who are in a situation similar to yours. You will help them with their debt.
You will help them with their bankruptcy. You will help them with their fear. You will help them face the consequences of their actions. This, I said, my voice a final, unwavering statement of truth, is your second chance. Not a second chance at a life of lies, a second chance at a life of honesty. They stared at me, their faces a blank canvas of shock and horror. They had expected revenge. They had expected punishment. They had never expected grace. They had expected me to be a victim, and I had become their savior. The forgiveness that doesn't remove the pain was a cruel reality. The pain was still there, but it was now a part of a larger story. A story of redemption. A story of love. And you, Rachel, I said, my voice filled with a profound and overwhelming sadness, you will not go to jail. But you will have to face the truth that you used your mother's illness to manipulate me, the truth that you were a part of a lie, the truth that your husband was a man you didn't know. Her face, which had been a mask of defiance, crumpled. She had lost, not to the police, but to her own lies. She had been defeated, not by my anger, but by my kindness. She had been defeated by a woman who had given her a chance to be better, a chance she so carelessly thrown away. I stood up, leaving the folder on the bench. The money was gone. My life was gone. But I had something more valuable. I had my dignity. I had my honor. I had my freedom. And I had a new mission. I was a witness to a story that would change not only my life, but the lives of my family forever. The final question was not about money, but about a choice. What would they do now? Would they take their second chance, or would they continue to be defined by their lies? The choice was theirs, and I had a feeling that the final reckoning was just beginning. The bitter regret on their faces was a bitter, delicious truth. I had won. Not by fighting them, but by loving them.